Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Radcliffe Strategic Regeneration Framework webinar. This is very new to me and very new, I think, to probably everybody in our current predicament around responding to COVID and trying to still be able to involve our residents in our plans for the future of the town. So I'm just going to go through some introductions. For those of you who don't already know me, I'm Councillor Rees Cathcart. I'm a Labour Councillor for Radcliffe East Ward and the Deputy Portfolio Member for Urban Regeneration to the Leader of the Council, specifically for the regeneration of Radcliffe. This evening, we've got a panel of officers and also from Deloitte. So we've got Simon Bedford, who's from Deloitte. We've got Paul Lakin, who is our Director of Capital Growth and Regeneration. We've got Crispin Logue, who's the Head of Strategic Planning and Economic Development. We've got Rachel Poole, who is our Assistant Director, bringing a vast experience of regeneration to the panel this evening, and of course myself here to answer questions from you or to direct them to our panel members. I understand this evening that we've had around about 160 people that registered to take part in the event, but total numbers will be given out towards the end of the session. I'm sure that some people may be joining us throughout the evening. So just in terms of how we're going to run this, Simon Bedford from Deloitte is going to be providing everybody with an update in terms of where we are with the SRF, the Regeneration Framework, and then after that presentation, there will be a period of questions and answers. So we'll allow for around about hopefully 40 minutes or so for Q&As. We've had some questions submitted before, and Liz Gillen, who is the project manager for this, will be fielding those questions. Just in terms of the questions that people might want to ask, there may be some thematic questions. So rather than trying to answer every single one of them, what we'll do is we'll look at the questions and pull them as you write them, and then try and frame them into some sort of theming context. And I think that way then we'll be able to just deliver the answers that people are wanting. The webinar is being recorded, so by taking part in this and asking your questions, you do consent to your data being shared and your questions being shared and your presence being shared. The recording of this webinar will be made available, it's hoped by tomorrow, on the council website, so it's available for the public to view, along with a summary of the main thematic questions that we're asking. So I think just to frame what it is that we're looking at here this evening is to ask the questions. First and foremost for some of you is, what is the SRF and how did we get here? Really this is a strategic regeneration framework that is looking at capturing the short, the medium and the long term wider interventions for the regeneration of our town centre. And it's going to concentrate on the core. I'm not going to talk too much about that because Simon's got a presentation for you, which I'm sure that you're all quite keen to listen to. So rather than me carrying on, I think I'll hand over to Simon. But just before I do that, I just want to kind of make clear that that this there was something in the paper around the commitment of the council to delivering this. I just want to kind of make clear that this is something that all elected members from all parties are supporting, and that there is a commitment from the council in order to financing the regeneration of Radcliffe Town Centre, and that whilst we have got this pandemic that is impacting on us, if anything, what it does is it it increases the urgency for us to look at how we can regenerate our town centres for the future of residents in the town. What we're seeing as well is that town centres are recovering quicker than cities. So where footfalls in city centres are down at 50%, it's around about sort of 20% in townships. So what we really need to do is look at our town, look at what our history tells us about the place, our people, and our vision for going forward in order to attract new investment from public streams, from private streams, from local and from national government, in order to create a town that's going to see us well into
Have you handed over to me, Councillor? Oh.
Yes, thanks, yeah.
Sorry about
so
that.
If you'd like to go to the presentation.
My feed went off for a second there, but hopefully everybody can hear me. If one of my panelists can put their hands up so they can hear me, that would be lovely. But good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm delighted to be with you this evening to present the Radcliffe Strategic Regeneration Framework to you. Thanks for taking the time out to join us. It's a really important time for Radcliffe, and I'm sure you will all recognise that. And I'm hopefully this evening going to give you some good thoughts on how you, along with the council and lots of other people, can take Radcliffe forward into a new future. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about the vision that we've worked on for Radcliffe, and we've worked on that not only ourselves but actually with the community, and we've had many community events over the last few weeks and months, but also political representatives of the council and indeed officers of the council. So let's be clear, this is not a piece of work that has only been developed by a consultant team. It's actually been developed by a whole range of different stakeholders as they come together to think about how to take the town of Radcliffe forward into the future. I'm going to talk about some objectives for the town, some of the things that we can do quickly, some of the things that will take longer. Not everything can happen at the same time, and it's important that we make sure that we do things in the right way and at the right time, such that it doesn't disrupt people's lives as much as anything else, and actually enables you to continue to do what you want to do as the town centre changes, and indeed the wider town changes. And I'll talk a little bit about where we go from here in terms of making sure that this framework doesn't just be a document in effect. It actually does a lot more than that, and it guides future investment into the town, as the councillor says. So what are we saying? Well, I know that people will say we've had different visions for Radcliffe before. There's been a lot of talk over the last few years around what should happen in Radcliffe. Why do we need another plan? This slide seeks to sort of set out a clear vision for Radcliffe, something that really illustrates Radcliffe's unique qualities. It is the finest example of a riverside town in Greater Manchester, not something that people necessarily recognise. It actually is. It sits on the River Irwell. The river looks splendid as it moves through the town, but we probably don't recognise that as something that is actually unique and something of Radcliffe. And therefore it's important that we do that. We make the town look and feel distinctive, a place where people can enjoy a healthy lifestyle. Everybody that lives and works and visits the town should be able to do that. And frankly, and not beating around the bush, the important bit about this piece of work is to make sure that we, over a shortish period of time, reinvent the town centre. The town centre has become tired, jaded. It isn't what it needs to be. It doesn't reflect a modern and thriving town centre, and we want to do something about that. It deserves to be something more than it is. And there is therefore a real focus in this piece of work on the core of the town centre. Not only that, but that's where we're going to start. What does that mean? It means over time that we will reimagine Radcliffe. We will make sure that it does look like a town that was built on the river, that it celebrates that fact, and that it is a distinctive place. It's a town where actually you already want to live, but others would want to live as well, as the town seeks to deliver a few more homes for people to come and live in and be part of the community. It should and will have excellent education facilities, including a new secondary school. I know something that people have long talked about, and that is very much part of this plan. It should have workspace in the town centre to complement actually quite a busy and lively set of businesses around the town centre. More workspace that looks to the future and different ways in which people want to work. Radcliffe is already well connected. It's important actually that it relies less on the road and more on things like walking, cycling, and of course Metrolink, where we have great connections not only into Bury but also back into Manchester, and indeed the bus connections that the town enjoys as well. So making use of all of those different routes into and out of Radcliffe on a more sustainable basis. And finally, a town that really does promote health and well-being, and you'll see in some of these proposals some real ideas around improving and developing the health and lifestyle ideas that can make the town better. Slide isn't moving forward. Yes, it is. Thank goodness for that. What does that mean in terms of the core? Well, I'm sorry this slide is probably a little bit small, but hopefully you can see that on the left-hand side of this slide, some of the things that we want to include within the town centre are name checked. More workspace, amenity space, new leisure facilities, support for children and young people, a perhaps smaller but more focused retail offer. As Councillor Cathcart said, towns are recovering actually more quickly than the city centre in terms of people coming back into them. But we have to recognise that shopping has changed. People do not go to the shops as much as they used to do. They do shop online more than they used to do. And perhaps we need slightly fewer shops in Radcliffe, but perhaps more focused offer that is frequented, is used very frequently and is popular. And I think we're going to see whether or not we can rebalance the shopping offer a little bit over time to make it a little bit better and a little higher quality than perhaps it is today. Okay, so what are we actually going to try and do? And the plan that you just saw before this slide begins to set out some of the ideas. I'm going to come on to them in a bit more detail in a moment or two. As I said, it's important that we make a start with something. There's been some discussions around how quickly we can move forward with some of the ideas that we have for a Radcliffe, and then over time how we can make sure that the early interventions that we've described them can then sort of broaden out and widen such that they become self-sustaining and enable us to make sure that, for example, we create more jobs, the cultural life and identity of the town is enhanced, we bring a digital infrastructure to Radcliffe to make sure that it is modern, fit for purpose, and used in a digital way by the resident population and business population. In the early stages, we want to really focus on the core of the town centre, and that will mean bringing forward a programme of change that will include a new hub, a new civic hub in the core of the town centre, a civic use. Radcliffe hasn't had a civic centre for a number of years, and having a civic centre at its heart will, we think, make sure that the town centre is well used, and we'll come on to the detail of that in a few minutes. An extended and enhanced market hall, perhaps moving into the market chambers building, making more use of that over time. Some more housing, Not huge amounts of housing, but a housing programme that makes use of those parts of the town that are redundant, that are not well used, particularly, for example, the East Lancs paper mill, long talked about, but maybe one or two other sites as well that can be brought forward to enhance the housing offer, broaden and widen the scope of choice for people wanting to live in Radcliffe. A parking strategy, car parking strategy that recognises at the moment too many cars parking in Radcliffe Town Centre that shouldn't really be there. They're parking there to go and maybe do something else. We only want people to park in Radcliffe if they're using Radcliffe for the purposes of the town centre and what it offers. If you're wishing to drive through or park in Radcliffe to go and do something else, then that type of parking should be pushed either to the sides or out completely from the town centre. And to facilitate that, we're looking at ways in which we can create longer stay car parking on the edges of the town centre, such that the town centre itself isn't dominated by the car. The new secondary school already mentioned, but clearly a hugely important part of the overall plan. Okay, so just taking a little bit more time to talk about the detail of these proposals. I mentioned this hub, so-called, at the heart of the town centre, and you can see in the light brown colour here two new buildings that are proposed at this stage to house some new office space and also a lifestyle centre, which would largely consist of what you would probably consider to be a gym, gymnasium type facility, a meeting and functions suite that enables you to hold meetings here for the community, all set within one new building, and then also perhaps a further development slightly to the north of complementary office uses, and with at ground floor some cafes, for example, or retail facilities. As I said, this new shops, new leisure facilities in a redeveloped core area. Now, I'm sure people will recognise that those two buildings sit on top of existing buildings, and there is a proposal here to redevelop the two 1960s buildings that currently occupy that space. That is the idea, and we'd obviously welcome people's views on whether or not that is something we should consider taking forward. That is the plan that we want to pursue at this stage. You will also see on this drawing some other ideas around complementary development, on both sides of the river, just making sure that that river is really exploited and opened up such that people can enjoy it. It is, as I said before, it's a very nice and special piece of riverfront, and it should be celebrated a little more than it is at the moment. So some ideas about how the town centre itself could be changed and redeveloped. And then, as I said, the Market Hall, a great success, it needs to be supported, nurtured, cherished, and made sure that it can sustain over time. So the idea here is just to make sure that the market is supported, that it's used properly and well, and perhaps that we extend the market chambers and that is brought back into use for small business occupation next door to the Market Hall. And we think the way in which that would then enable the river to be opened up, perhaps with some balconies or similar, would be a nice way of bringing the river back into the town centre. And then in terms of the housing programme, just to give you a slightly wider view of some thoughts around housing, you can see some of the sites that are proposed for new housing, both on the canal banks, actually, the site there that was the old Millwood Primary School, which would potentially give you an access to the canal, which is another really positive part of the town centre offering. And then also on the East Lancs paper mill site, as you can see there, and perhaps also site 10, the Blackburn Street site could also form a housing use over time. Looking at that parking issue, a diagram that isn't the easiest to understand, but really trying to make sure that, and if you can see my hands, that we pull the car parking away from the core of the town centre and put it in dedicated parking, perhaps making a bit more use of the Asda car park, a big surface level car park, could put perhaps a car parking deck onto the Asda car park and make it a little better used. Obviously using the ring road as the main artery and access to that, rather than other smaller roads to get access to that car park. That would be part of the plan. And then the site of the secondary school, and people probably familiar with the plans there just to the north of the town centre, perhaps with also some enhanced leisure uses alongside it, subject to the plans of the council in overall terms for the leisure offer for Bury, but perhaps with a new swimming pool, for example, to support that secondary school facility. So that, in simple terms, is how we see the core of the town centre evolving over the next few years. It's a radical plan, we think. It involves big changes. It involves a complete rethink of the way in which the town centre works. It means less cars, it means more walking and cycling, a better and safer environment for people to enjoy, but also some new buildings and some new facilities right at the heart of the town centre. And we think if we can get the core right, then some other good things will begin to move away from the core of the town centre into other parts of Radcliffe. And that enables you to begin to think about some wider interventions, some thoughts around the edges and further parts of the town, which will be stimulated, we think, by a vibrant core. Enabling people to think about new ideas, new businesses coming and setting themselves up in Radcliffe, taking advantage of the place, a good place to be. I think town centres are going to have a better time over the next few years than perhaps we predicted, as unfortunately the pandemic impacts are felt. It might make town centres like Radcliffe feel a little bit more friendly and a little bit nicer places to be, and we need to harness that opportunity and encourage people to come and live and work here as much as we can. And as you move further afield, you can begin to see this plan doesn't just focus on the town centre. It does talk to the canal, the river, the open spaces that surround Radcliffe. It is perhaps a little bit of an unknown gem to some degree in Greater Manchester, and you can see that it does really sit within a blue and green landscape, and that should be made more of, we think, as the plans unfold. Any strategy shouldn't, though, just be focused on sort of the physical. It needs to think about wider people orientated things, cultural initiatives, a more focused retail strategy. It's important that people use the town for a variety of reasons, including to celebrate what it is to be a resident of the town. And I'm sure we will see that. You will also see nicer public open space being brought forward. As I said before, a better appreciation of both the river and the canal. And making sure that, you know, those good walking routes, cycling routes, and opportunities to enter green spaces in Country Park and other parts of the wider area are made easy, are made accessible, are well signed, such that people can use them without struggling to some degree to work out, you know, where they are and where to go. And we think that can be readily achieved. Sorry if there's a slight delay on one or two of these slides. In developing this plan, we have also thought about the future. And the future comes in really two big ticket parts. One, to make sure that we respond to the climate change emergency, and that the solutions being suggested are in line with ideas around reducing our reliance on carbon, and therefore you will see through this document ideas and strategies that do respond to the climate change emergency, including a much stronger focus on more active travel and active access to parts of Radcliffe, including the town centre, and less reliance on the car. But that's not the only thing. In terms of new buildings, we would expect them to be carbon friendly in terms of making sure that they are sustainable. Also, we want to make sure that this plan is digitally proofed, that it actually enables people to use Radcliffe from a digital perspective. There's one thing we've learned from the pandemic, it is the fact that we actually can work online, live online, in many ways, more ways than we thought we could. And it's important that we enable the community to use the digital networks that do exist and new ones as they come forward to make the town easier to navigate. And we want to make sure that that is a possibility, and indeed, if possible, make Radcliffe an absolute exemplar for digital infrastructure. So that is a rather fast move through the framework. I'm sure those of you who are on the call will have lots of questions for us. We are consulting, and hopefully you will have the ability to look at summaries of this document. The consultation closed on August the 3rd, not too far away, and then in early September, the Cabinet at Bury Council will consider all of the consultation that has been brought forward, and a revised document will be prepared for endorsement by the Council thereafter. And then we hope we will move into the doing. And it is important, as I said right at the start of this, that we do get on with the doing, as long as everybody agrees it's the right thing to do. So what would the next steps be? Well, in the short term, there are a series of projects that we would want to bring forward, and the Council is already working through the detail of how some of those plans and ideas that are suggested in the document can be brought forward. Councillor Cathcart made it clear at the start of this presentation that the Council is committed, even in a post-COVID world, to Radcliffe and to making sure that this plan can be brought forward. I'm sure that's to be welcomed. So there's work to do in the short term, and then over the medium term, 2 to 5 years, we will see this transformation of Radcliffe begin to emerge. These things do take a little while, but it wouldn't be too long before that new civic hub was actually up, running and open, and we hope that that would happen by 2023. And then over a slightly longer period, you will begin to see some of these other plans that are embedded within the framework coming to fruition. That's the plan in its entirety. Lots of ideas, lots of thoughts has gone into this. From our point of view, it's been a truly collaborative effort, which we've enjoyed very much working on with our colleagues at Bury Council, and hopefully I've been able to give you a flavour of what's in this document and some of the ideas that we want to take forward. So I think that's me. Let me just click back on that, leave the plan on rather than our logo, which we don't really want to see. Back to you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the presentation. Obviously, as you said, there's probably lots of questions, and we've got a good bit of time now to open up to the panel any questions that residents might have or want to ask. So really, we've got about an hour to ask questions and answers, and I'm happy to set the ball rolling on that. So I think the way we're going to work this is if residents have got questions, they can ask the questions and type the questions in. They'll come through to Liz Gillen, who will then put those questions out to the panel for us to consider and answer. So Liz, have we got any questions that we need to start with?
Yes, hello, Councillor Cathcart, and thanks for that. Thank you, Simon, for the presentation. We have had a small number of questions that were submitted prior to the webinar, and we did ask for people to submit any questions in advance if possible. So I'd just like to run through those initially. And I would say that some questions that have been raised as we have progressed will be picked up by these pre-submitted questions as well. So if I could just ask the panel, can the council confirm that it is committed to the regeneration of Radcliffe, and in particular that's referring to the funding position for delivery of the SRF? Thank you, panel.
Okay, so if I can take that. Just to reiterate, as I started out at the introduction, that the council is absolutely fully committed to the delivery of the regeneration of Radcliffe, and that's the reason why we commissioned the strategic regeneration framework. I like many of you have seen that the questions that have been put out there around why do we bring consultants in, people like Deloitte, to master plan these things, and the answer to that is that local authorities nationally don't have the skill sets to do that, and this is why across the country we bring in advisors, and what we've got in Deloitte's is one of the cream of the crop. You know, they're nationally recognised, they're local, and they're headed up by people who understand our region and the needs of the Northwest. The SRF is here to help provide a shared vision of regeneration, and it's a tool that we're using for directing both public and private investment, as I said again at the start, and we'll seek to draw funding regionally, nationally, through the government's levelling up. They've put the Northwest as a priority, and so that is something that we will be looking to lobby. We've got the support of our MP Christian Wakeford to back this plan, and as I alluded to earlier as well, it is fully supported cross-party. In terms of the commitment from the council, we've actually began this process a couple of years ago, and that started with things like infrastructure change, the moving of the bus station, inviting Lidl to build their store in the centre of Radcliffe, and they were just some of the kind of initial early steps that we started to take in order to reinvent the town centre, to encourage investment, and that then was followed with a commitment of £500,000 on the Radcliffe Action Plan, which we've got the task group, and that's already delivered again on some of our earlier projects around the public realm improvement, increasing CCTV presence in order to promote public safety, public realm improvements and civic events that we ran in the market exchange and through the market. We've began to implement our car parking improvements and restrictions, and we've also had the first wave of our Shopfront improvements grant scheme, which I understand that the second phase is due to roll out anytime soon. And in order to continue to support this regeneration framework, we've committed another £700,000 that's been allocated to drive forward this next phase. As Simon's last slide said, this is about where the consultation, everybody having their part to say, that being that information being collated and reported back to the cabinet for endorsing. And once that's been endorsed, what that means then is that we've got a framework that we can use as material purpose when we are looking at how we grow our town centre going forward. And we want to ensure that Radcliffe is, by having this, is positioned in the best way for any bids and it will help us to secure fiscal stimulus, any that's likely to emerge coming forward in the future. And the Cabinet has also reported and is committed to a full council investment fund to help drive forward these big interventions, such as things like the new public hub mixed civic leisure facility. As Simon said in the presentation, we've got already a number of fronts in terms of the housing developments, including Homes England, which is going to deliver those homes on the East Lancs paper mill site. We are expecting the decision from the Department for Education anytime soon. We know that despite the COVID pandemic, the DFE are still, they are still going through their interview processes, and our academy partner, Star Academies, which is one of the UK's leading academy providers, is waiting for that interview. They contacted us and for some additional information, and we're waiting on that decision. And then obviously we've been in discussion with other key landowners around the core area, such as Asda, around the car park and that sort of thing. So we really need to work collectively with the community, businesses, elected members, MPs, and lobby collectively, and that's what this webinar is about, really, and it's about demonstrating a shared commitment to the vision of reinventing Radcliffe, or kind of revamping Radcliffe, however we want to frame that. So that I hope that answers that question, but just open it to any of the panel members in case they've got anything they want to kind of come on and add on to that.
I think that was pretty comprehensive.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cathcart. I think you touched there on the new school being opened, with the timescale being 2023. There's been 2 or 3 questions submitted, just asking a bit more detail and asking, is that a realistic time frame for the school to be built, or does this mean that the school will have to be located in existing buildings, or is there going to be a new building? Thank you, panel.
Okay, there's 3 questions in that one question there. There's, I think, just in terms of the commitment and can it be delivered, the simple answer is yes, that is very much predicated on the Department for Education's time frame in terms of giving us a decision. So if we get a decision prior to September, which is where we're roughly hoping that we will have that decision, then it's very much doable. And I think that we can give examples around Elton High School and Castlebrook High School in terms of new build schools and the timeframes in which they're able to be quite quickly implemented. Star Academies have got over 28 schools nationally, and they will have build footprints and plans for the types of school that they want, given the size of the grounds that is there for the school. So in terms of plans, drawing up plans, those sorts of things are already there. It is just a case of actually the contractors coming in and beginning the work. So from that side of things, in terms of will we have a school up and running ready for 2023? Yes, it's very doable. But as I said, it is predicated by the Department for Education's decision. In terms of the other questions, I'm going to go to the panel. There's some questions around, do we need any other buildings? I don't know if that was with regard to the Radcliffe School, or if it's about any of the others.
Liz, I think I can come in on that supplementary question. I think the question was about whether or not we need temporary buildings to facilitate the opening of that school. I think the councillor has answered that in effect. If the funding is imminent by September, then a new school will be facilitated within that time frame. If there is any delay to that, that may require some temporary buildings in the meantime. So I think that answers that supplementary question.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, panel. And just related to that, I don't think we've covered it. One of the pre-submitted questions was, will the existing pupil referral unit be amalgamated into the new school? Thank you. Yeah.
I can come in a little bit here, as I am a governor on the Spring Lane School site. So we had a governor's meeting this week. There are conversations taking place with the local authority about what that means for the school. It does mean that either a new site would need to be identified for Spring Lane School to be relocated to, but there are changes in how Bury is using its inclusion offer. So we're very much working in partnership with 2 other schools to look at trying to keep children actually safe in education and keep those school education placements open. So at this moment in time, the answer isn't certain. It could be that there's a relocation to existing facilities, or there may be some requirement for some new build. I don't know if any of the officers have got anything they want to comment or add on to that. That's my understanding of the situation as it stands as a school governor.
Again, I can just add to that briefly. It's the referral unit wasn't part of the submission to DFE. It's certainly not part of the amalgamation plans. And if there is a requirement to find an offsite, that's where we are looking at as a local authority. So it's not actually part of the secondary school proposal.
Thanks, Chris. That was my understanding. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, panel. Question 4 of the pre-submitted questions, please. What guarantees can be given to the delivery of the proposals, and will the current pandemic impact on timeframes? And there has been a couple, 2 or 3 additional questions in relation to that as well. And also, will the plans be reviewed or need to be reviewed, and the proposals and delivery in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like me to say something about that?
Yeah, Simon, I was going to come over to you because my response was going to be because I had a sort of written a question around obviously Deloitte's are experienced in delivering these types of projects. So if you could give some context to some of the work that you've done and the timeframes around that, and then where that sits in the present context.
Absolutely, and thank you. So a couple of points, and they will be slightly general in their answer, but I think just to try and give some reassurance around this, we have thought really carefully about this plan, particularly the plan in the core of the town centre. It is, in our view, something that can be delivered at a value for money cost. So it isn't something that's pie in the sky. It isn't something that we've just sort of dreamt up. We have actually thought about it quite carefully, and we've looked at the commercial issues that will need to be addressed in bringing it forward. That includes talking to landowners, for example, and I know there are 1 or 2 questions around that, and I'll deal with those a bit later. In terms of the impact of COVID on these plans, there are themes here that haven't changed. There is a theme, and people have touched on it, and again in 1 or 2 of the questions that have been raised around the way in which we shop. The fact is that we're already beginning to shop more online. The only thing that's happened in the COVID period is that we've actually done more of it, and therefore it is important that the plan responds to a slightly lesser requirement for shops than we've had in the past, and it does. That doesn't mean that people will not want to go to town centres and visit them for a variety of purposes, including shopping. There will still be shops, absolutely, there will still be shops, and there'll be shops that you want to go to. So that isn't going to change. We need to make sure the streets are safe. We need to make sure that people can walk in safety and cycle in safety. That is something that's been absolutely exacerbated by the pandemic. People want to feel safe, and I think these plans will make you feel safer, particularly as a pedestrian and cyclist. I think that's to be welcomed. I think generally it is too early to say what the long-term impact of the COVID pandemic will be on our communities, on our towns, and so on. So whilst we can see some things that we need to think about more carefully, it's very difficult to predict with any confidence what is actually going to happen as we move hopefully into a period of time where we have a vaccine, and that actually we are managing this particular infection. So yes, we have thought about it. We don't think these plans are prejudiced by COVID particularly. We think they were actually in line with some of the things and trends that we're going to see moving forward. We do want to embrace digital technologies and digital infrastructure. It should be available to everybody. I know, again, people will worry about whether or not they have the opportunity to access facilities and services online, and hopefully that will be. I mean, I think digital inclusion is hugely important, and we should make sure that every member of society has that opportunity. So that should be part of this plan. So in overall terms, I think that the plans are not prejudiced by COVID as far as we can tell so far, and they have been very carefully thought about in terms of their deliverability.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for that. Question 5, the last question of the pre-submitted questions. Could the council shopfront grant scheme be extended beyond the immediate town centre boundary? Thank you, panel.
I'm going to let Chris answer that question, if that's okay. In short, the answer is we want to focus on the core, but there may be some scope, but I'm going to let Chris answer that.
Okay, yeah, you're right, Councillor. The action plan, the Radcliffe action plan, allocated £100,000 to shopfront improvements. The first phase of that, around £40,000 was spent. So there's a residual amount of around £60,000 left, and what we're looking to do is to launch phase 2 of that. We've had some inquiries from some shop owners about getting access to that. What we would like to do is to focus or concentrate those monies within the areas that the SRF is promoting as being the key streets where most of the activity is going to be in the future. So that will be the priority for that spend. But if there are any monies left over, I think the boundary will be extended. So the answer to the question is yes.
Thank you, Chris. I've had a couple of people saying that they're struggling to connect. Liz.
Apologies, Councillor Cathcart. I appear to have lost you. Councillor Cathcart.
You appear to have muted yourself, Councillor.
Right, sorry. Oh, yes, I did. Oh, that thing that my wife loves, muted myself. Yes, Liz, sorry, I was just saying I've had a few text messages off residents saying that they were trying to get in. I didn't know if anybody was waiting in the lobby. If we could just have a check.
Yes, we can get Alex to check that, please, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Chris, for that. In terms of additional questions, we've had numerous. I think we're on 68 questions submitted at the moment. So as we mentioned earlier, we're just going to try and pick out key themes. One question I think relates to consultation. Could I ask panel, how will interested parties remain involved in the SRF and the consultation process in order to make the best of any decisions that are made? Thank you, panel.
Sorry, so that's how will interested parties remain involved?
Remain involved in the consultation process and to make the best of any decisions made.
Okay, so I think that this, as I've already said, this began 2 or 3 years ago when we started to look at the public realm improvement. We had some other consultations done. We incorporated community volunteers, residents and members, as we have done with lots of consultations over the years, and I've been part of some of those along with residents and share my frustrations in some of the things where we may have felt that we've been rightly have been overpromised and under-delivered on. One of the things that we've done is we've set up a Radcliffe Regeneration task group. This task group is set up of all elected members. It's chaired by myself and Councillor Smith from Radcliffe First, and also as well we've got Christian Waitford, our MP, who is also on that task group, along with members of the business community and also residents and community groups. And the task group is the group that is accountable for driving forward the SRF plans that officers will report to in terms of the process and progress that we're making, and in terms of any strategic decisions that need to be further made following on from the consultation. So I hope that answers that question, but again, I'll open that to the panel to see if there's any additional things that I may have missed on there.
Yeah, it's Crispin here again, Liz and Councillor. Yeah, I think the Radcliffe task group will be the main forum, I think, for continued dialogue and conversation. The SRF itself is obviously a high-level plan. There's several aspects to it. You know, these will evolve over time, over the years as we implement those. So there will be further opportunities to look at the detail and to shape that detail through that group. And then obviously, as we move towards planning applications, you know, there will be opportunities to consult on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the responses there. Numerous questions have been raised in relation to traffic and parking and the issue of possible congestion in and around Radcliffe. So perhaps if we could touch on that, please. In particular, are there any planned infrastructure improvements associated, particularly in relation to the proposed potential housing development? And how does the parking plan in the SRF fit with the Metrolink proposals for extra parking provision there? So I think lots of questions on traffic congestion. So perhaps if we could just cover that, please, panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I'm going to defer this to the officers in the first instance, and then I'll have my comments at the end.
Do you want me to say anything about the parking plan to start with, and then perhaps Crispian can make a few comments as well, perhaps on housing? The plan is designed to reduce congestion. Actually, it is designed to reduce the number of cars moving through the town centre. There is actually quite a good road network around Radcliffe. It actually obviously is very narrow and constrained in the town centre itself, and part of the problem is caused by people coming in and parking because they are actually moving to some other place, but possibly the Metrolink stop, and we'd like to curtail that. So ideas around that are actually to push the car parking to either side of the town centre and reduce through movement. One idea is to actually, as I said before, to increase the size of the car park on the Asda car park, right on the ring road there. There is clearly a plan to increase the amount of car parking actually at the Metrolink stop. That would, of course, have two impacts. One, it would increase the movement to it, but actually it might prevent or stop people parking elsewhere rather than in that car park itself, and that should be the objective if that car park is going to be expanded. So this is a plan that is designed to reduce congestion, not increase it. Housing wise, Crispian, I don't really want to say anything about that.
Yes, thanks, Simon. Yeah, obviously the SRF itself does propose a number of key housing site development sites that have largely been in the pipeline for a number of years now, and obviously the SRF seeks to bring these forward. And as we've alluded to, there's conversations ongoing with key stakeholders to deliver those. They won't necessarily appear overnight. Some of these are quite sizable and will take several years to build out. Nevertheless, I think at the point of planning applications, when they come in over the months and years, they will need to demonstrate that they have mitigated for the additional traffic on the existing highway network. That's both within the sites, around the sites, and it also includes junctions away from the site. So those planning applications will have to have full and detailed transport assessments that will be assessed by planning officers, you know, on an individual basis and collectively as well. And further afield from that, we do produce borough-wide transport studies, and we're always looking at opportunities to improve junctions and bid for money. So the SRF itself shows a commitment to these sites, and as well as monies to regenerate Radcliffe. This also presents an opportunity to bid for monies for junction improvements and public transport as well. I think that answers the question.
Thanks, Chris. I think the question of infrastructure, transport, congestion and traffic is definitely something that concerns residents, and the questions are rightly to be asked. I think that one of the things that we have a way of doing, though, is viewing the world through the lenses of where we are now, where we sit today, and the things that we see today, as opposed to what will the lens look like in 10 or 15 years time, and viewing that from the point of view of that globally there is a move towards electrification, reducing our carbon footprints, looking at, again, as Simon and Chris have alluded to, in terms of how do we reduce vehicular movement and encourage people, not just to get cars off the road, but in terms of improving their own public health and getting people walking, getting people moving. I can cite areas around sort of South Manchester, like Trafford, for example, where there are these quite extensive beeline cycling, secured cycling routes that are in place, that are really widely used, that go. There's also the electric bus network that runs sort of from I think it goes from Wigan up to the centre of Manchester. So there are all sorts of different plans and strategies in place that are designed to encourage people to stop using their cars. That alongside the cost of driving your vehicle in the next 20 years, as we see electric cars becoming more and more commonplace, until we see sort of the reasonably priced family electric car. Most of those are going to be out of the reach of everyday people. So I think a combination of both national strategy, regional planning, and also as well cultural change that will, you know, shape the future generations. We will start to see naturally the use of cars come down. We probably would struggle to imagine that right now, because most of us get in the car to drive to the shop around the corner, which is a bit of a travesty in its own right. But I think that my ask is people try to not view the world so much through the lens of where we sit today, but to think about you know, what does tomorrow's world look like. I hope that kind of surmises some of the things that the officers have put in there as well.
Okay, thank you, panel. Just moving on, there's been numerous questions basically asking, is the SRF dependent upon building housing on the Elton Reservoir site? And what is the connection? Is there a connection between the SRF and the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework proposals? Thank you, panel.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Just to be really clear, the SRF is not predicated on the GMSF. They are entirely separate. They're not dependent or interlinked on one another. They have their own consultation processes, and the SRF is in its own right here to be delivered as a standalone programme, and funding programmes for the SRF are on the basis of that it goes ahead in its own right and is not part of the GMSF. So I just want to be really clear. This is about the core of the town centre. This is the master plan that we can see here on the screen, and one is not dependent upon the other in any way. I don't know if one of the officers want to come in just to kind of add their opinions or comments to that. Simon, you no. Again,
Councillor, I can just come in just to reiterate that as somebody who's involved in development plan work and regeneration plans. The two are clearly different documents going through completely different consultation processes. And the two are not dependent on one another. So the SRF is a standalone document. It's something which we are keen to get endorsed. You know, like I said, to help deliver the key proposals in it, and obviously to be able to bid for any fiscal stimulus that comes out in the autumn and beyond.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks panel. As I said, just trying to combine numerous questions. Another key theme emerging, panel, is in relation to the provision of leisure facilities and how that's proposed within the SRF. A couple of particular questions. What has happened to the promised Radcliffe baths? And a second question is, why is the leisure being indicated across two locations? Presumably that's in the Civic Hub and potentially the new school, and should the wet and dry leisure not be located together? So I think numerous questions, as I say, just in relation to future leisure provision for Radcliffe. Thank you, panel.
Okay, thank you. Simon, I don't know if you want to come in from a Deloitte's point of view to give your, you know, your sort of side of things in terms of where you've got to and what the rationale behind the two sites was. Then Chris, and again, I'll come in at the end with comments. I think you're muted. You've done that thing I do.
Sorry. Very briefly, thank you. Firstly, the plans are still, the leisure still to be agreed. And need to be part of a broader strategy for the delivery of leisure across the borough. There should be wet and dry facilities, so swimming pool and what we would call dry leisure facilities in the town to support the healthy lifestyle and living strategy that we've suggested. There is an option of bringing the leisure, part of the leisure probably, rather than all of it, right into the core of the town centre, makes it very accessible and makes it very much part of that sort of core area. But that would be difficult, we think, to achieve with bringing a swimming pool into that facility as well. It would actually be very expensive and actually make the scheme probably more difficult to deliver than we would like it to be. Equally, there is an option of building the leisure facility in its entirety, perhaps close to the school, but that might miss an opportunity to create something more lively that people could use day in, day out in the core of the town centre. So that's the reason it's been split. It's not a done deal by any means, and the consultation process should help us make sure we come up with the right answer. Undoubtedly, we should have both. The swimming leisure wet facility probably more readily located closer to the school, but they could be combined, probably not combined in the core of the town centre.
Just a short supplementary on that panel, if possible. We've also been asked the question, could we include, is the scope to provide a running track as part of the leisure provision, please? Thank you.
Chris, do you want to come in there? I mean, I've got my own answers, but I'm mindful that some of my answers may be, you know, I'd love to promise the world, but I don't want to get into that situation that we've been in the past. So I think some of it taps into what Simon has already said around that broader leisure review. But yeah, if you want to come in there and then I'll come back. Yeah.
Yes, Councillor. I think there is the leisure proposals in the SRF. I think is a bit fluid at the moment. It isn't as tied down as some of the other key proposals in the SRF. You know, following on from what Simon said, there is an opportunity to attract footfall into the core. You know, through a daytime and evening time leisure facility. You know, and that there will help the spin-offs in terms of the other businesses in the town, including the evening economy. And likewise, there's arguments why they could be co-located on another site. I think as we sort of work through as we begin to understand a bit more about what we're doing with the secondary school and the funding and the time frame for that, I think there will be a conversation there about how much land is needed on the old Coney Green site. And whether or not there is an existing footplate to develop something a bit more comprehensive there. You know, that's still something which is, like I say, very fluid. You know, and the point which has been mentioned there is that there's a leisure review on in terms of how that can be managed and delivered. So, you know, I think the purpose of the consultation is really just to get people's views on that, and that will help to feed into the leisure review.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, just to sort of sum up there, then really what we're actually saying is that the whole kind of wet dry offer is subject to a leisure review, and then the results from what we take from the consultation and from our discussions with the school provider. I just want to tip on, obviously, there was a question specifically about the running track. I know that we've got a fantastic local athletics club, and I've been out running with them myself a few times, and they helped me with my efforts in London Marathon last year. So thanks to those people there. I think that, again, like conversations with the school around what their plans are, we can see on the plans there around number 14 there looks like some sort of running track there, and obviously within the community we've already got something. And it might be that actually what the school is not just a facility where we send our children to educate them, but also something that becomes a part of who we are and our community. And I would like to think that if there are those sorts of leisure facilities available, that the school does look to partner with the community and with local clubs, not just the athletics club, because we've got loads of different clubs in Radcliffe, to really promote that kind of partnership and community life.
Councillor Cathcart, can I just come in briefly here?
Yeah, sure, Paul.
One of the things I think we need to think about with leisure as well is it's not just about the kind of traditional model of the leisure centre as somewhere people pay to swim or pay to go to the gym or use a sports hall. It's very much a part of where walking groups or active groups or cycling groups can meet up. You know, these have, you know, the modern thinking about these spaces is that they are genuinely a part of the mix for the community. You don't go there just for a specific single leisure visit. So again, in terms of the way we think about the hub and the leisure centre facilities, it will be very different from perhaps the sort of traditional model of a leisure centre as just being somewhere you pay, go in, change, go home. Yeah, we want to encourage active participation in all kinds of sports and things that 10 years ago, like walking football, weren't round, that are pretty popular now. How do we help a leisure centre facilitate more people getting involved and people who haven't done sport or healthy activities get more involved? So I think we'll see something a little bit different from some of the older leisure centre models.
Thanks, Paul. That's really great. That's good.
Thanks, panel. Thank you. An interesting, quite relevant question here has come in. Given the proposed changes to the planning legislation, allowing the changes from commercial to residential, do the panel think that this will increase the value of town centre buildings? And if so, is that likely to impact on delivery of the SRF, particularly, I'm presuming, in relation to the Civic Hub proposals?
I'm going to defer that to, I don't know if Simon might be the best, or Paul.
Yes, I think
Simon's smiling the most. So.
New planning legislation. I'm not quite sure. It's very new, isn't it? So I think that my view will be that again, offering a general answer to the question rather than a too specific one. I think the proposals that we brought forward are entirely in line with what you would expect from national, regional, and local planning policy. The reuse of the town centre, the higher quality development to enhance what is there already. So I think we will go through due process to make sure that these proposals are properly reviewed, looked at, and understood. But I think they will be largely in line with a solid policy proposition.
Thank you for that, Simon. Does anyone else want to come in there, or are we happy to move on to the next question?
Well, I would simply comment, Councillor Cathcart, I don't think there'll be any material move in land values in central Radcliffe from the changes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, panel. A couple of questions have come in, just again related to finance for delivery of the key proposals and commitment from the council. If I could just push a couple together. There's likely to be an economic recession. Local authorities are likely to face funding cuts as a consequence over the next 5 years. How much of a relative priority is this for the council in this circumstance? And related to that, again on finance, a comment submitted that the 2 buildings in the centre of Radcliffe to make way for the Civic Hub are not owned by the council, and is it likely that finance will be available to progress that project as one of the key interventions? Thank you, panel.
Okay, so just in terms of, again, reiterating the commitment from the local authority in terms of delivering this, and also as well to consider the wider kind of national implications around funding income streams. Where do local authorities get their money from? How do they sustain and provide services? Part of the income generation for all local authorities nationally is only going to come from business rates. And so when we look at town centres like Radcliffe and some of the other townships beyond in Bury, then it is incumbent on us as a local authority to do our best in order to ensure that our town centres are fully functioning and are able to attract new investment and businesses in order that the council can then reap what it sows from the point of view of being able to generate the income it needs in order to provide those very services that we've come to expect as part of the delivery that the council have to give to residents and their other statutory commitments. So I think that in terms of yes, there may be, you know, an economic recession, but I think Simon has also said that and answered already that he feels that it is very much within scope, that it is very much deliverable at a value for money cost. And in terms of the second part of the question, I am going to go to the officers. You know, I could add to that, but I think it's important that we ask some of our panel members to answer some other parts of the questions as well. So, yeah. Yeah,
so just picking up from that and trying to be brief as possible. Clearly, yes, the buildings that have been suggested for reuse are in private sector ownership. We've consulted with the owners of the buildings, as you would expect us to do, and they are interested in working with the council to see if we can bring these plans forward. So you know, it's not as though we haven't discussed it with them. We have, and I'm sure the council will continue that dialogue. There are ways in which we can make this work financially, which will not be necessarily a burden on the council. It's important that people recognise that this is just not a proposal that is all about the council. It isn't. It is designed to make sure that others would want to invest into Radcliffe and get involved. So we don't just see this as a council-led, council-owned project at all. It's designed to make sure that others will invest. Are we looking at a recession? We probably are looking at a downturn in the economy, of course we are, but these plans are designed for a longer period of time than just the next sort of 12 months or 2 years, and we should be seeking to bring something forward that will work over a longer time period.
Thank you, Simon.
Councillor Cathcart, I'll just add, I think if we're looking at the regeneration of the town centre, it's clear there's too many small retail units, and this SRF I think gives us a framework and a proposal to reduce the amount of small retail units. And if you look at the age of some of those units and the adaptability of some of them, it's probably pretty limited. So I think it's yeah, a really good opportunity to get hold of some blocks in the town centre and make what retail's there more vibrant, reduce the amount of void units in the town centre, and you know, frankly, bring a bit more life into the town centre with people working there who can then spend money in local shops and cafes and bars and in the local amenities. So I think the council will look to be part of the stimulus, if you like, to help make a new building work in the middle of Radcliffe. I just can't see any solution that involves keeping the existing buildings in the form they're in now.
Thanks, Paul. I definitely would agree with what you're saying. That I think as well, just for some of that clarity around, actually, as you're saying there about, you know, some of the things that we often hear residents complaining about in the town centre is that, you know, they walk through a ghost town where there's lots of empty units, and why can't we do this and why can't we do that? And as has already been alluded to, well, the local authority don't own a lot of those town centre units, and so those conversations with the owners are imperative in terms of looking at, as you say there, reducing some of that footprint in order to make the town centre future-proof, really.
Okay, thank you, panel, for that. And I think that's probably, I had another question lined up, asking Simon really if he could expand on what is meant by a focused retail strategy, just to clarify that, please. And I think we've touched on some of that just from the comments from Paul, and also related to that, what would happen to any displaced businesses, for example, as part of that project, to create the civic hub? Thank you.
And if I can link that to one or two other questions that have been raised, Liz, because I think it largely you know, relates to local opportunities. And I think when we talk about focused retail, what I really wanted to get through this conversation is the opportunity for something better. The opportunity for there are, I know already, lots of local businesses that occupy premises in the town centre, and they should, if possible, be rehoused in the new Radcliffe Why shouldn't they be? They should be. And this isn't a project that is seeking to displace local business. Far from it. Actually, it's the opposite. And that should really also mean that we're focusing on independent retailers, independent businesses looking to establish themselves in Radcliffe, giving them the opportunity to do something a bit different, to provide something that local people would want to use and patronage. Use basically. We've seen a lot more of that during the pandemic period. We've seen a lot of people wanting to use local facilities, local shops. Buy local, and I think we should make sure we harness that. We should also, yes, absolutely give opportunities to local businesses, architects, designers, other businesses that want to relocate to be part of this, and that absolutely should be the essence of what we're trying to do here. It's not about big businesses dominating this situation. It actually should be something much more localized. So I would hope that the strategy does, as it unfolds, give grace to the local businesses to be part of Radcliffe's future.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I think I just echo that. In terms of the language that's used, I'm really conscious that some people might be thinking, well, if I'm a trader, what does that mean for me? And what I've clearly heard there is that actually it's about sustainable retail offer that's available for people, that's going to drive footfall into the town centre. So if we take away all of our retail offer and all of the local businesses, then there's no purpose for people to come, and that kind of defeats the entire object of what we're seeking to do. So it's not about displacement, it's about future proofing, it's about consolidation, and it's about ensuring that we have a town centre that businesses are vibrant and meeting the needs of our local community and residents.
Okay, thank you, panel. And again, just related to that in terms of local business involvement, a question, I guess, in relation to procurement. How will we source local companies to assist in the regeneration projects? And I think there's been a couple of questions from a local building company and local architecture practice. Thank you, panel.
I was trying to pick those up actually in the comments I made. I absolutely see that there should be opportunities for those sorts of businesses. That was my comment.
Paul, would you be able to come in here, because this is definitely something about the Bury Pound, isn't it, or the Radcliffe Pound, in terms of we want to support our local suppliers in order to ensure we create employment opportunities and wealth locally, because that money taps right back into our own kind of local economies, and as they benefit, so do we as a local authority.
I think that's quite right. I think there's two different aspects. One is where we're directly procuring the service. I think we should have a stronger local purchasing bias within our frameworks, and that's certainly something I've talked to our procurement service about, because I've been trying to get a Radcliffe company involved in doing some brownfield land investigation work in Bury Town Centre at the moment, and it'd be good if we could have a more explicit way of going straight to some of the contractors in Radcliffe and Bury generally. The other way we do it is, if there's a large contractor coming in for the works programme, we ask them to put very clear statements of local benefit, so what they will do through their contracts. So that will include how much of their sub work they try and pass through to local companies, but also some of the wider social benefit statements they might make. And of course, Councillor Cathcart, you'll be well aware with the flood defence work of the value those contractors bought and the extra contribution they made through their work on that particular project. But that's a great example of where we want to see contractors deliver a wider benefit through the works packages we might procure them to undertake for us.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and I can add that BAM Nuttall have actually, been fantastic in terms of not just putting flood defences up that have protected over 600 residents going forward, and obviously as we move into phase 2 more, but also as well their contribution to employment locally and little things like fundraising. I think at the last meeting that I went to, they contributed already just amongst their staff alone, fundraising of in excess of £6,000 or £7,000, and we're sponsoring local football teams. So really embedding themselves within the community, and I think that in terms of procurement, that's what we need to be seeking to continue to do for large contractors, in terms of, well, what's your commitment to social value and to our local economy and suppliers as well.
Okay, thank you, panel. Again, a further question. There's been 2 or 3 queries raised about this. There's been concerns raised about flooding in Radcliffe, obviously the flooding in 2015, and also how could that impact on, for example, the proposed walkways, the riverside walkways, and given that a couple of the bridges were washed away when we had the last flooding incident. So how would flooding impact on the proposals? Thank you, panel. That's a question, having been someone who's been flooded, as many of you already know. I've alluded to it many times. Some of the questions that I have been asking have been around when we look at our river, how flashy it is. And whilst that can be an asset, it can also be, quite frightening and quite destructive in what it can do. So obviously, any plans that are put in place around, around opening up and using that blue infrastructure need to definitely be taken into consideration the nature and flow of the river. We've had the flood defences phase 1 installed. That £46 million investment is there and will open up new opportunities such as this. If we didn't have the flood defences, we wouldn't be able to look at some of the other kind of plans that we've got here now. Obviously, consultation with the Environment Agency and other planning providers would need to take place. Again, I'll just go over to officers for them to add their insight into that.
Can you take this, Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think during the production of the SRF, the Environment Agency have been spoken to and have formed part of the consultation. And obviously anything that goes in terms of those walkways will have to be in accordance with what the recommendations are in terms of height and flows and safety is paramount, as you alluded to. So Simon, I don't know whether you've got anything to say in terms of what those conversations that have taken place.
No, I think you've summarised it, Crispin and Councillor Cathcart. I think we do recognise that we have to have a safe environment. It's really trying to work out how we can make the river more visible to people in Radcliffe. I don't think we're looking at major proposals here, but there are things that could be done, I think, safely to make that a reality. So I note the comments about walkways. They will have to be safe. We do get that.
Okay, thank you, panel. And I think just expanding on the green and blue infrastructure and the walkways, there was an earlier question in particular asking about the banana path adjacent to the former Coney Green School site, just asking if there are any proposals to introduce lighting and or CCTV on there. Thank you, panel.
I think I can come in and just answer some of that stuff. There is from Belgrave Drive down to the Red Bridge already lighting in place. We recently have had installed following setting up a community group with some local residents from Greenbank and in partnership with governors from the school at St Mary's. We set up a community group, applied for some funding, but also as well spoke with the police and the cabinet member last year, and have installed additional 3 CCTV cameras on the lower end of the Banana Walk. So there is now CCTV coverage that kind of covers the entire lower section of the Banana Path, and that is in response to residents asking us to do something about that. So it is covered from the bottom up to kind of the Red Bridge. Obviously, this plan focuses on the core, and I think that that's a separate aside longer term issue. I think Simon's alluded to kind of that wider strategy around opening up and bringing in the canals. Everything that this plan is about driving people back into the centre of our town, using the pathways, using the canals. The other thing to think about, just going back to my conversation about how we view things through the lenses that we look through today, and actually this path, as you look where number 14 is, you can kind of see there the path, the Banana Path that kind of comes down, is where the school is going to be, and so very much that landscape will change and be much, I would imagine, much more open, much safer, much more visibility, because there will be hundreds of children going there every day. So I think that we need to kind of consider those things as material in our plans as well.
Okay. Thank you, panel. Just a quick question. I'm conscious of the time now. I'll try and get a couple more questions in. Just a quick one. How many pupils will the proposed new school accommodate, please?
So I think the plans for the proposed school site is a 800 with capacity to grow to, I think, 1,200. I think that is, but the initial intake obviously would be phased over a number of years. You don't just put 800 children into a school straight away and expect it to all run smoothly. So there's usually phased introduction on a year-on-year basis that's rolling. Paul, I don't know if you, or Chris, if you want to kind of come in and add anything to that, but that's my understanding that the plans are for 800 in the first instance. Is that about correct?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Councillor. The proposals are it's actually 600 initially, 600. As I understand it, ramping up to 1,200 in time as the school opens to a 7-form entry school over time. Just to make everyone aware that the bid to the DFE has gone in for the full 1,200. And the way that potentially the construction might take place is that you build a shell. It's cheaper potentially to build a full shell, but only operate from a fraction of the building. So that's the aspiration.
Thanks, Crispin. Thank you. I'm just mindful of the time, Liz. So if we've got maybe one more question, and I think that we kind of will have covered most of. I'm sure. I mean, there are lots of questions, and what the consultation will do is hopefully provide the answers to all of those, all of those questions that people have. And obviously, we know that this isn't going to be something that is delivered overnight. There will be a project team dedicated to the delivery of this that's going to be based hopefully within the market chamber. So I think that as time goes by, there's going to be other opportunities for us to come back and talk to residents and answer more questions. So we just take one more question, and then we'll wrap up and round up.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Cathcart. Final question: will there be any places for local community to take up learning or skills to get them into employment? I'm assuming that might relate also to the proposals for market chambers. Thank you, panel.
Well, do you want me to go in, Councillor Cathcart?
Yeah, you can do, Paul.
Yeah,
I
think when we look at new public spaces or public buildings, it comes back to what I said about the leisure centre. You want to create spaces where lots of different things can happen, and that should include spaces for people to learn, places for training to take place. So I think, yes, it could happen at the Market Chambers building, it could happen within a new hub building, it could form part of a new leisure centre, but we are acutely aware that there's a lot of challenges around adult skills in particular, and we need places where people can learn, and accessible places where people can learn. So I think that will form a part of how we think about the key buildings we want to bring forwards.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I just echo that absolutely, and not just the community hubs, and but also as well to again be talking to our school, which we want as a cathedral of excellence, to educate and be part of a lifelong learning. So we can. I would hope. Be talking to Star Academies about their vision for lifelong learning. What does that mean? How do we involve our children and their parents and their families? And how does that tap into community as well? Because they are part of who we are. Okay.
Okay, thank you panel for that. I think just to reiterate, and we touched on it earlier, that all the questions raised today are going to be answered as part of the frequently asked questions section on the council's website. So apologies to those who didn't get their questions answered directly today, but we will be picking them all up in the next couple of days, and they'll all be as part of the FAQs on the website under the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'd just like to say thanks to all of you that were able to tune into this webinar. It's the first time that I've ever done anything like this, and is obviously something that going forward as part of our blended offer of how we can communicate with residents that we'll have to look to do. And I also think probably it's enabled perhaps more people to engage with us that wouldn't necessarily be able to get out and meet with us in the community. So as we move forward, we've still got the consultations online. Please can I ask everybody to take part in that and share that as widely as you can. Everybody's got the opportunity here to have their say between now and the 3rd of August. It is a tight deadline, and that's because we really do want to get this through to Cabinet and have the paper approved, so that we've got the SRF in place to be able to get cracking on funding bids and moving this regeneration plan forward for the town. So yeah, once again, thank you everybody. Thank you to the panel for your time this evening, and I look forward to speaking with you all again in the future. Goodbye.